The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Media, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Everybody, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, your host, and very pleased to be joined tonight by one person that you know very well and someone else who's not ever been here before, but we hope that this will not be her first and last time here. To my left is Lisa Sennholz. She is the founder and executive director of Damascus Road here in the Oshkosh area. And to my right is someone you probably recognize if you watch the Oshkosh Common Council meetings. It's Councilwoman and Deputy Mayor Deb Allison-Aasby. And she is the Business Development
Director.
Yes, and what exactly do you do in that role?
That's a great question, Cheryl. Well, what it was supposed to be was more kind of the nuts, the bolts, the policies, the procedures, more of the back end, the business sustaining part of the nonprofit. But as nonprofits, many people know that I've been a part of them. It's turned out to be more than that, and probably as Lisa will talk, I'm sure, later through the questions that you have for her, the definition really should be farmer, because we're usually plowing some pretty hard ground. Okay. So where instead of being more on the back end, pretty much everybody whose roles were kind of in the back have gone forward just because of the need of serving women and girls in our community.
Okay, so the topic of our show tonight is human and sex trafficking, and I did a show on this with some faith-based folks. I want to say about 6 or 7 months ago. It was toward the end of 2016, and at that time, you know, I think we were just kind of starting to recognize some of the numbers locally and so forth, and just since then, I have seen so many things on the news about sex trafficking, sex trafficking, sex trafficking. And so Damascus Road, you can tell us exactly what Damascus Road does, but this is what you do. You work with people who have been trafficked.
Correct.
Okay. So tell us when you started the group, why you started it, and
Sure.
what exactly you guys do.
Sure. So I started Damascus Road back in 2009. It didn't have a name back then. It was just me. The story goes back further than 2009. In 2001, my husband and I had traveled to the Philippines for our second trip. The first trip we made there was in 1998, and we did a medical missions trip. And I had always wanted to do international adoption. We had 2 biological sons, and we wanted to adopt another child. Didn't care, boy or girl. And so when we went to the Philippines and did the medical missions trip, we literally fell in love with the country. And so we knew that was where our child was going to come from. So we flew home, we started the adoption proceedings, and when we flew back to the Philippines to pick her up, it was 2001. She was 15 months old. She was living in an orphanage. And her particular orphanage was broke down into sections. So the way they had it was there was the newborn to 3-year-old, and then they had them kind of divvied up that way. And so one day we were making small talk, her orphanage director and I just asked a question. And I thought it was just a simple question that was going to get a simple answer. I had no idea it was going to change the course of my life, this question. And so I had said to her, you know, this is my second time here, and I've seen so many homeless children. I see kids all over, infants, toddlers, early elementary age, and they're not in orphanages. They're living on the streets. What's happening with these kids? What's their fate? How are they surviving? And so she ended up explaining to me that there were child sex brothels that actually were all over, and that I passed multiple on my way to the orphanage. I just didn't know what they were. And she said that most of the children would end up working in a brothel. They would be tricked, coerced, sold, whatever the situation, or just because they couldn't survive. Mm-hmm. And so when she told me this, I had said to her, so you mean when these kids are, you know, the 12, 14, 16-year-olds? And she looked at me and she gestured and she said, no, now. And my daughter's orphanage was 0, newborn, to 3 years old. And she explained to me that pedophiles from all over the world were flying there, and they had underground tourism businesses set up. And you could, if anyone watching is old enough to remember the whole Fun Jet package, when you would book a trip and you would actually get your hotel and your car rental and, you know, anything was included in that Fun Jet package, that they have underground travel agencies that were doing the same thing with pedophiles. They were booking trips and coming over to the Philippines and using children. And so when I got on the plane, I have this 15-month-old that I'm bringing home to a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old who are already at home. And I remember thinking, I'm a stay-at-home mom who lives in northern Wisconsin. What could I possibly do about trafficking happening in the Philippines? I didn't even know what trafficking meant. It was 2001. She had used the word, but I didn't know what it meant. And so fast forward from that, at that point, I had made a promise to myself. I promised my new daughter, I promised God that I was going to go back and do something. I thought it was only happening in the Philippines. I had no idea that it was happening anywhere else. So in 2008, I started investigating, how can I get involved? What can I do? And there was really, if you Googled human trafficking or sex trafficking in 2008, you found maybe like 2 or 3 things would pop up. And so I called the organizations that popped up and I said, hey, I want to help. I'm not skilled. I have no training, but I want to help. And each one I would call would say, are you, and then they'd give a litany of what I needed to be. They'd say, are you a psychologist? No. Are you law enforcement? No. Are you an attorney? No. And they'd start asking all of these questions, and by the end of the conversation, they'd say, well, I'm sorry, we can't use you. We need people who know what they're doing. And I kept thinking, but how am I ever going to know what I'm supposed to do? No one will train me. And so I made one last phone call. I was very discouraged and I was going to give up. And my husband encouraged me and said, just go online and look one more time. Maybe there's an organization you didn't see last time. And so I did. And I found an organization based on the East Coast, Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I called them, and the conversation started out with, I immediately thought, I'm going to just tell her the way it is. And I said, I need you to know I'm no good to you. I have no skill. I have no training. I'm completely useless. But I feel like I'm supposed to do something to help fight trafficking. No one will train me. No one wants to use what I have to offer. You're my last hope. And she kind of laughed and she said, we don't care that you have no training. We can do that. She said, what we need you to have is a passion. And if you have a passion to do this, we'll work with you. So they did. They did long distance training with me. I did a lot of online training, and they sent me DVDs, and we talked on the phone. And their name is World Hope International, and they're a great organization. And so in 2009, they took me to Cambodia. And while I was in Cambodia, my entire life changed. We worked with children who had just been rescued out of brothels within hours. 9-year-old, 7-year-old who had PTSD. It was so horrific and so all-consuming. I didn't know what my next step was.
Right.
And so I came back to the U.S. at the end of 2009 and still naively did not know that trafficking happened here. Now I knew it happened in the Philippines, and I knew it happened in Cambodia, and I knew it happened in the rest of Southeast Asia because we had talked about it on the Cambodia trip, but I had no idea it happened here in the U.S. So I went for about a year, blissfully not knowing that, and went and spoke anywhere anyone would offer me to come. I went to churches, civics organizations, and I only spoke about Cambodia because that's all I knew. And then in 2010, beginning of 11, I ended up running into someone literally on the street corner here in downtown Oshkosh. She had started the first annual, I guess it's a trafficking awareness event. And I understood that she was doing work in the U.S., and I said to her, "What are you possibly doing here?" And she explained to me what was happening, and so from that point on, I became educated on what it looked like in the U.S., how trafficking is the same in Cambodia as it is in Oshkosh. It just looks completely different. The way that the victims recruited, kind of how they're sold and that sort of thing, it looks different, but it's all the same.
Sure, sure. And so, as an organization, then what do you guys do?
A lot. So what we started out doing is very different than what we do now. What we started out doing was me traveling internationally, and then me speaking wherever I was invited. And then that grew to people saying, "Hey, we have a victim and we don't know what to do with this victim. Can you help us?" I didn't know what to do with the victim. I didn't know where to go with them. And so just a lot of education and training and a lot of trial and error, honestly, because unfortunately, Wisconsin at the time and currently still does not have dedicated facilities for 18 and over sex trafficking. We have them for under 18, but not over. And so as things progressed and I actually became more educated and I was in the community, we were then I was asked to come and train law enforcement, social services, probation officers. I've trained TSA agents, and the list kind of just goes on. And through that, we started making more connections with people. And so then we realized, okay, now we have a victim, but we don't know where to go with them. We don't know what to do with them.
Right.
And at that point, I started investigating other states that had programs. And so started making connections and writing up lists of Tennessee has this program and Texas has this program. And so I just started calling programs and saying, "You have a dedicated human trafficking restoration program. We have a victim. How do we get them to you?" And so we just started transporting victims, and it kind of blossomed from there.
So how do you at Damascus Road, first of all, let's backtrack for a minute, because we've all heard for years about the young girls who run away from home, and the next thing you know, some of them end up in prostitution. So how do you know if it's that, or and she's doing it of her own free will, or it's someone who has actually been trafficked? And how do we separate the difference between human trafficking and sex trafficking?
Well, it's all sexual exploitation. And so we kind of lump it. So commercial sexual exploitation, you may have someone who's willingly in the sex trade, but we have found a common denominator for those who are being forced into human trafficking and for those who seem to willingly be involved in the sex trade in some shape or form. They all have one thing in common, and that is prior sexual abuse as an adolescent or a young child. And so what we have found, so one of the things when Deb came on board that she's been really good at is helping me to understand that it's important to keep statistics and information. Prior to that, is just, there's a victim, we need to help them. I didn't keep records or anything like that. And so as of January 1st, because of Deb insisting that all of these things are important, and they are, I'm just not good at doing them, that we start keeping track of different things. And so from January 1st of 2017, I can give you information. And we have 46 girls young women and women who we have worked with. And of that, 2 have stated they were never no kind of prior sexual abuse. And so we see that it makes someone very predisposed when they have that trauma in their life of that prior sex abuse. Mm-hmm. It leads them down paths and it makes them a little more vulnerable. And so when we speak at high schools and we work with youth groups and we speak to kids, one of the things I always stress is, if you have that as a piece of your story, you have that prior sex abuse, you need to be extra vigilant and extra careful because predators look for those kinds of things. We had a survivor consultant who was with us for a number of months, and she always said she was abused starting at age 3, and she had abuse. She ended up being sex trafficked at 15, and she had a multiple plate full of issues. And she said, my whole life I always felt like I had some kind of invisible stamp on my forehead that just said, abuse me, abuse me. Mm-hmm. And I never understood why. And what we find with these girls is, I guess the way that I think it's the easiest to think about is if you think of a tree, and a tree has a lot of branches, the branches are all of the issues that you're seeing, but the root down here is why the branches exist. Mm-hmm. And so we see drug abuse a lot with our girls, and the drug abuse is really, most times, not all the time obviously, but most times, it's just indicative of what the root is down here. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to cover that root with numbing. They don't want to remember. They don't want to think about what happened to them. And so that's kind of a piece of it. Another piece of it is sometimes when you've been abused, you want to take back power in any way that you can. And we believe it's a misconception that women in the sex industry, that it's empowering. I do not believe that that's empowering in any way, shape, mm-hmm. or form. And so, but when you suffered abuse, if there's any time you feel you can have the upper hand, so if they're willingly involved in the sex industry, it becomes, I control this, and I'm in charge. We had one of the women we were working with, we used to do work in the legal brothels out in Nevada. Most people don't know that Nevada is the only state in the union that allows for legalized prostitution in the mm-hmm. form of a brothel. And one of the women we were working with had made a comment to me that has always stuck with me. And she had said, her and I got to be very close, and we would text each other and talk. And I asked her, I said, how old were you when you were first sexually abused? And she said, how would you possibly know that? I never told you I was sexually abused. And I said, well, I know that because you're here of your own volition. You don't have a trafficker or a pimp. You are willingly coming to this brothel and you're working here 12-hour shifts. And that tells me that there's something that was broken in the chain for you to actually be here doing this willingly. And she said, well, I figured what my dad started taking from me at 5, I might as well now get paid for.
Huh. That's terrible. I mean, it's terrible at any age, but it's just stark madness when it happens to kids that young. Mm-hmm. And I can't even begin to imagine seeing what you guys see. What you see with people is a lot of what I see with animals and my work with animal rescue and so forth. But, when you're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds being trafficked for sex, it's revolting, along with so many other words that I can't even say on the air. I could, but this could be my last show, so I won't. But so when you get word, do you get word, I'm assuming, from police, from jails? Who notifies you that someone has been trafficked?
Well, I'll take that, and Deb can kind of fill in on where I'm going to go with this. What we were seeing is we were getting victims, and Oshkosh Police Department has been really, really wonderful in working alongside of trying to make sure that these girls are actually getting associated with an organization that can help them. And so we were working with a detective here on OPD, and he would give us cases, and what we were finding is the girls, when we would go in and we would work with those particular girls in the jail, in the Winnebago County Jail, they were telling us, you need to meet Kristen. She's in here and she's way worse than I am. Her story's way worse. You guys need to talk to her.
So it's word of mouth.
And so what we started finding was there are so many women in the Winnebago County Jail who have sexual exploitation as a piece of their story, but they might not be in jail because of it. They maybe weren't arrested for prostitution. They might be there on a drug-related charge, or they might be there on a probation revocation, or they might be there on shoplifting. But that's a part of that's just a branch. Their root is that sexual abuse. And so we started thinking, how do we reach these women? Because law enforcement isn't giving them to us, because they don't even know that that's what they're there for. So we came up with this idea, and we had posters designed, and we actually went and spoke with the jail administration at Winnebago County Jail and said, we have this idea, and this is why we want to do it. We have this poster put together, and we are asking if we can put them up in the jail, and then they have specific questions on them. Questions like, have you ever been asked to trade something of value of yours for, and then it'll list food, a ride, housing. You know, we've had women tell us, I had to give a sexual service just for a hamburger. I was hungry. I needed to eat. So we devised questions that if someone's reading the poster and they're a victim, they're going to start looking at these questions and going, okay, that's me. I can identify. And so then at the bottom of the poster, we had put, you know, if this sounds like you, go ahead and contact us. And so the jail they've been, there's no word to say how extraordinary they've been to work with. They had said, we are your guinea pig, right? And I said, yeah, you are. We've never done this before. And they said, it's okay. We're willing to be your guinea. But if you do anything wrong, we'll shut you down real quick.
Yeah.
And I said, that's great, because we work real well in parameters and boundaries. And so that's where Deb can kind of take off, is we placed these posters. We put them up on a Thursday night. Well, we didn't. The jail staff did, probably after dinner on a Thursday night. And by Friday morning, we already had 3 women contacting us saying, hey, we read your poster. Can we talk to you?
And are these underage girls?
Nope, they're 18 and over.
Okay.
Because they're in the
Okay.
Winnebago County Jail,
Okay.
not the juvenile detention center.
All right. And so what are they saying when they call?
So they fill out a inmate request form, and then they turn it in, and then whoever's on shift at that point either emails it or faxes it in. So then it comes in and it says, like, I seen this, or somebody told me about you, can you please come in? And that's when then we figure out when can we get to the jail to do that initial assessment. It's interesting because at that point, typically, something has gone on, or, you know, they're repeat through the system, and at some point they've just are like, this is crazy, this is enough, I can't do it anymore. And so then we come in and talk, and we're very clear that we're a faith-based organization. We don't provide an actual service. We're not counselors. You know, as Lisa said, the organizations out there sometimes say, well, you got to be this, or this. But what we can do is be the conduit to maybe services that they need in order to get out of the life.
Okay.
The biggest surprise, I think, is that it's not just the component of the sex trafficking. It's been the drug addiction, and more surprisingly, how many of them have mental health issues that haven't been addressed either. So we kind of find all of that out. The biggest thing in which, because you're like, well, how does this keep happening? Because they all say it is not a picnic, you know, to be in jail, or if they've, you know, are possibly looking at prison, that whole lifestyle. But what we were starting to hear is that I don't have any other choices. I try, but then, you know, who's going to want to hire somebody that might have a felony on their record? Or how do you explain when I've been in here for 9 months or 10 months and get out, you know, and then maybe there's, you know, restitution that has to be paid back, but typically there's no landing spot, there's no transition.
Right.
So then they're like, we just go back to doing what we were doing before, selling drugs, selling ourselves, recontact the pimp, recontact, you know, the drug and or the pimp, and then they just get back into the lifestyle because they can't afford rent, can't afford car insurance. So the thing that I was most determined, and that's what I've been working on in this last month, is that there has to be something. And so I started investigating. There's a number of, you know, technical colleges and things that actually have funds for, you know, women or men, but you know, we're women, to start to give them some options. Because what we found out is that, you know, when you talk to them, some of them are so incredibly articulate and smart. You know, one would like to cook and one would like to do this and all those types of things. You know, even entrepreneurship, you know, type classes. Some would like to get and be able to mentor others, and they would like to go back to school. They just, in their mind, they're either not worthy or they just don't think the resources are available.
Financial resources
To help them, you know, get like a 1-year, you know, certificate or a 2-year degree.
And not only financial resources, but just to have someone on their side. Someone who, we've heard so many times, you know, just thank you for listening to me. Thank you for believing me that this happened.
Yeah. So I want to clarify. Are we saying then that all prostitution is sex trafficking?
Well, that's a murky area to get into.
Well, I know, but if people have usually got into prostitution because of some kind of sexual abuse at an earlier age, and I mean, unless they're doing it on their own and they're their own pimp, if you will, you know, they're handling the whole show, the whole shebang. Unless they're doing that, then they are being trafficked in some way, aren't they?
And the drug can be a trafficker as well, because they're exchanging what they have of value for that drug. But I think, so with human trafficking, in order for it to qualify as human trafficking, if we want to put it that way, it needs to meet force, fraud, or coercion. One of those three things has to be present. And all three of them can be, two of them can be, or one of them can be. But at least one has to be. The only time that is not accurate is when the person is under 18 years of age. Because no one under 18 can legally consent to sex for money. And it's not just sex for money. It's sex for fill in the blank. Survival sex. So if you have a 15-year-old, let's say, who runs away, and this 15-year-old has exhausted all of her options. She's stayed at relatives, she's couch surfed at everybody's house she can think of, and finally she's out of options. She's truly homeless now. She has nowhere to go. A 15-year-old does not have the mental capacity to truly understand what predators are preying upon. And so they become very easy prey because they have a need that needs to be met. And so for viewers who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have the bottom of the pyramid that has to be met. This girl is not getting anything met, let alone the top of the pyramid. So if you're a trafficker, you just need to meet those needs. And so a lot of times they will trade what they have of value, which is their body, for whatever. And that means they are a human trafficking victim.
Okay.
Money does not need to be exchanged. It can be a car ride to Walmart. And I wanted to mention, too, that prior to 2000, so there's something called the TVPA, and it's the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Prior to the year 2000, we did not have anything on the books for the United States. So if you were a victim that came in, a foreign victim, say you came in from the Philippines, our government had grants and services, and you could apply for a T visa, and you could have help here in the U.S. But if you were a U.S. citizen being trafficked, there was nothing to help you. There was nothing designating that you were a victim. So once the year came 2000 and the TVPA became enacted, that's where the rules of what designates human trafficking.
Okay. We've got some websites and a phone number that I'd like to have put up on the screen for the duration of the program. There's your website, DamascusRoadProject.org. And I also found another site online, HumanTraffickingHotline.org, which had a lot of good information on it too. And then I hope that they have put up, or will be putting up, your email address, Lisa, which if they don't have it, that's fine. I can give it. It's lisa@DamascusRoadProject.org. And do you guys have a local phone number or no?
We do, but I don't have it memorized.
That's okay. That's okay. Lisa@DamascusRoadProject.org.
I think it might be on our website too. We have business cards with it on, and I just haven't memorized it. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's fine.
I'm awful.
This isn't a test.
Well, I just
not
flunked
a
it.
pass or fail. Just wanted to make things easier. But you can go to DamascusRoadProject.org, and a phone number is probably there. Otherwise, we also have the phone number for the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 888-373-7888, and I believe that we have that we can be putting up. So I know that you didn't keep numbers or statistics prior to this year, but since this year, and I'll look at Deb because she's the numbers person here, since the start of this year, how big of a problem is this in Wisconsin, and then from there in our, what do we have, 72 counties in the state? In our 72 counties, specifically Winnebago.
We had statistics, I think the last ones we got from OPD were from the end of 2015 or 2016?
And we have 2016 now, too.
Okay. So to be honest, I don't know what those specific numbers are, but is it an issue? Absolutely. I knew what was going on in Wisconsin because obviously of the relationship and friendship that Lisa and I have had, and so when her and Troy had started this, had talked about it, but again, I was like, it doesn't happen here. Happens in Vegas, or at,
And that's where
Atlantic
it stays.
City, and
that's where
that's exactly where it
Vegas,
stays.
right?
Yeah. But it wasn't until we have our current police chief, but even the police chief before, where started to realize that it was happening right here in Oshkosh. And I had called Lisa one time, or Facebook Messenger, and said, "Did you know this is going on in Oshkosh?" And I could tell she was like, "Yeah, duh." As I've been telling you. Because I had heard that it was going on in Milwaukee. And again, you think it's just Milwaukee or just a section.
Cities.
Yeah.
I mean,
Chicago.
Yeah, I know better. But still, when you think about it, you think about everything happening in big cities because that's where you have the greatest proliferation of people. You think of drugs being the biggest problem in big cities. And for the longest time they were. And now look at how that has filtered down into little old Oshkosh too, although we're not so little anymore. But I think things maybe start in big cities, but they move pretty rapidly to middle America.
But I think the hard part is, and Lisa probably has the updated numbers, but to the previous point, like Lisa was saying, what we're finding out is that there's a number of women that we've come across that they're not in or not a statistic, you know, because they weren't arrested or part of a sting operation. So it's far greater than what the numbers are
Sure.
statistically on a piece of paper.
Sure. So you talked, Lisa, about how these kids in the Philippines, you know, were being trafficked at a very super young age. That's when a lot of this starts. But you guys are only dealing with women 18 and older in this county. Who is helping the younger people who are being trafficked?
So we are open to helping anyone, but because of the trajectory of where we headed, it's only logical that we're really focusing on 18 and over, because the jail outreach has just exploded. We are so busy with just the jail piece of it that we could do nothing else and fill up our time with just the jail. So
Wow.
we did actually assist on a case with a 15-year-old, and we are not opposed to helping with the younger, but I feel that as an organization, I really feel that you need to kind of pick your focal point and go with it. And I know a lot of organizations try to do everything, but I just don't think that you're as good as you can be if you're doing everything. And so what we see are there are organizations that are dedicated to just youth.
We have a relationship with a gentleman that started a nonprofit specifically dealing with children in Milwaukee. Jared. Phenomenal.
And they're opening up a home just for children.
Okay.
And, you know, it's interesting to talk to him because, you know, we see what goes on with the women, and it's heartbreaking. I think you really have to be a very special kind of person, because when you think of a child that's gone through this, I mean, you really have to, you know, do a lot of self-care.
Yeah.
Because that's a very difficult arena to be in.
Yep.
Right. And we partner with other organizations. And so their focus is under 18, ours is over 18, and we partner with other organizations who are also over 18 because you can't do it all.
Okay.
Yeah, there's Deanne Lawson, who has Inner Beauty Center in Milwaukee, and so she's a rock star. I mean, we deal with the gals, but she's actually on the streets Tuesday afternoons and Friday evenings, and she's actually going in some of the toughest areas of Milwaukee, doing outreach, supplying bad date cards, water, granola bars, power bars, personal items, different things like that. And so, you know, sometimes we'll do outreach down there, and that's even a whole different world because you actually see it going on. You're aware of the traffickers and the pimps that are there, because usually the gals a lot of times will let us know. It's very different than in the jail. That's a totally different. You know, you see the girls, you know, they're all 18. If you talk to them and you ask them how old they are, they're all 18. And there's a couple that, like Lisa and I were like, there's no way they're 18. You know, just a couple of beautiful girls. But there's some that you can tell that they've been in that lifestyle for a while. And they'll give a heads up and say, you know, there's a trick that's parked down the way, he's not very nice, or, you know, the pimps are right around the corner. And then there's the others that you can easily see. And it's interesting because there's one particular corner, every time we go there, it's always a different gal. And if we go to approach, you can just see the terror in her eyes. And you know she does not want to be there. And so it's very different than what we're typically doing in Winnebago County.
One of the women here at the jail that we've worked with in the last few months had actually shared her story with me, and she had told me the exact street that when we go down to Milwaukee and help participate in the outreach, she was actually being forced to walk that exact street. And I asked her, I said, so what would have happened if we would have met in that situation instead of here, where you willingly contacted us and you wanted to meet us? What would you have done? Would you have responded the same? And she said, I would have just kept looking straight ahead and just said, I was sorry I couldn't talk to you because he was watching me. And I would have known I couldn't speak to you. And so it is a completely different arena, because even if the girls want to talk to you, a lot of times they can't. And so they just have to put their head down and keep walking, or just say no thank you.
Because there is likely significant consequences.
Sure.
If we were to continue to engage, and that's we immediately back off, because we don't want any harm to come to her. So we meet them where they're at, and if we can tell, we just back off.
Yeah. So you say that you're a faith-based organization. Like, that means different things to different people. Do you work with different religious groups? I know you said you've talked to different churches. How are you faith-based? Are you affiliated with a specific church or a specific denomination? Or help me understand that.
So, no, we're not.
Okay.
No, so we are independent. We're faith-based two ways. One way, when we refer these girls to a program for long-term restoration, we only refer to faith-based programs. And we have found that they have the best track record with recovery for these girls long-term. And because I identify as a Christian, and I believe the reason that I do this is, I believe Christ died for my sins, and that I was a horrible, terrible person. And I'm a new person because I believe what he did for me. And so because of that, I feel that I can't not give an opportunity to someone to become a different person.
Sure.
And so that is why Damascus Road is named Damascus Road, because for anyone who understands the scripture that talks about, so Saul, he persecuted Christians, and he was traveling down the Damascus Road, and it says in the Bible that he encountered God, and God said, Saul, why are you persecuting my people? Why are you doing this? And so at that moment, he changed, and he went from, he was killing every Christian he encountered, or he was ordering Christians to be killed, and then he became the greatest prophet that we ever had other than Jesus. And so I just felt that if someone like Saul could become Paul and could do the things that he did and change his life so drastically, there's hope for everyone.
Sure.
And so the girls, they can change. They can get out of the situation that they're in. And it's not just the girls, it's the pimps as well, and the Johns, because they're stuck in their own kind of bondage.
Okay. So someone wants to get out of this life that they're leading. What does Damascus Road do to help them achieve that?
So it depends on if they can leave the area. So we have girls that are on papers, which means they're on probation, and so they can't leave Winnebago County. For those girls, it becomes a lot more challenging because we have to find local programs that we can plug them into. For the girls that can leave, we find them in the long-term restoration, and those long-term restorations will go anywhere between 9 months to 18 months, and they will really focus on the person as a whole. They're going to focus on all of the pieces, not just the sex trafficking piece. They're going to focus on what happened to them as a child that then led to X, Y, Z. And so it depends on the person's situation and circumstance. We also have people who are not on probation and they're not ready to go to a long-term. And they just want to stay connected with us, and they just say, thanks for being there and listening to us, but I'm not ready to change right now. I'm not ready to address the issues. And so we just kind of walk alongside them and we say, okay, we're here, no judgment, no pressure. Whenever you're ready, you let us know.
What can we, as concerned citizens, do, and Christians, but more importantly, I guess, just as concerned citizens, because not everyone is a Christian, and I respect that. So what can we do as concerned citizens to keep our kids safe, our loved ones safe, our neighbors safe from falling into this rut, if you will, that becomes the only life that they end up knowing?
Well, I think probably the most important thing that would come to mind first would be for the younger generation to be taught exactly how predators recruit on social media, because that's what we hear a lot of, is how they actually recruit. And kids, just because they're kids, they don't look at things the same way adults do, and obviously that makes them much more vulnerable. And so recruiters know that. Traffickers know how to recruit. Traffickers, when they've been arrested, have told authorities, you know, I become their rescuer. I come in and say, you don't have a good relationship with your mom? That's too bad. I would never treat you like that. I would never talk to you that way. And they start the grooming process. And so then at that point, that teenager starts thinking, well, this person understands me. They get me. They don't treat me like I'm a child. They don't tell me I can't this or that. And so they open themselves up to going with that person, and then they become trafficked in many instances. So it depends on the age group that we would be educating. But for parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, just concerned citizens, to kind of educate themselves and know what to look for. And one of the things when we do our presentations, one of the things I say is, if you take nothing away from this presentation, this training today, just remember one thing and share it with someone. Share it with your coworker, with your neighbor, because we've had instances where people have been told something and it sticks in their mind, they remember it, and they've made a phone call. And there's been recoveries because they've called on something that just didn't seem right and didn't look right. We have, thanks to Deb, we now have insurance for Damascus Road. We never did. And I was speaking with our insurance agent, and she had told me that one of her clients, not in Winnebago County, in another county, had called her and said, she owns a gas station. And she had said, you know, I saw this girl come into the gas station. Something didn't seem right. She seemed very nervous. She seemed very scared. Just a lot of red flags. And she said, I went up to her and I said, you know, do you need someplace to go? Are you safe? And the girl said, I'm not safe. And so she took her in the back room in an office and called authorities. That girl eventually was recovered from, she was being trafficked. And this person just knew something just didn't seem quite right. And so just being aware, kind of learning signs. One of the things we tell people, especially teenagers, is, you know, we say, if you see your friends, you know, teenagers know their friends. They know what they can afford. They know what their parents can or can't afford. And so we'll tell kids, you know, if you see your friend who you know their folks can't afford an iPhone, and suddenly she's showing up with an iPhone, and she's got some new designer jeans on, and she's got a handbag, and her hair's suddenly colored, and oh, she's got nails now. You need to ask, where did you get that? How did you get that? You're not working. A lot of times what they'll end up hearing is, oh, I have an older boyfriend, or whatever the line is that the trafficker gave. A lot of people want me to give them kind of a black and white, cut and dry, this is how it happens. There's not one, this is how it happens. There are several, this is how it happens a lot of times, but every trafficker operates differently.
Sure.
And so just kind of looking for obvious signs that you wouldn't maybe necessarily call out. So for family members that have younger kids, looking for those things I would say would be a really good red flag, and to kind of pay attention.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you talk about this as the grooming process and so forth, because that's how a lot of things start with gangs as well. You know, kids who fall into gang life often not always, but often do not have a good home environment.
Right.
And they're looking for family somewhere else. And so some of the things that you're describing here, Lisa, are very much like what you'll hear from kids who have become part of a gang. You know, and so it's just so important. I mean, I'm not a parent. I'm a dog parent, but but I'm not a
different kind of
parent.
parent.
But you know, I mean, you don't have to be you know a chicken to recognize an egg. I guess you know you have to be able to recognize some of the signs, and people have to know how important it is. If you have kids, it's really super important that you take the time to provide them with a good family life, take the time to talk to them. You know, how many families don't talk? You know, I'll be sitting in a restaurant eating, and every single member of the family is sitting there doing this number on their phone. They're not talking. You know, and if they're not talking when they're out to eat in a restaurant, can you only imagine what it's like in their home? They're probably not even eating together in their own home. You know, home life today is most often not the way it was when we were growing up.
Right.
Not at all.
You know, and I understand that with both parents working, it maybe can't be. But you can still have some semblance of a family life. And I mean, for God's sake, if you don't want kids to even get into a position where they could fall victim to something like
Correct.
this, then start making some changes now.
I have a story that goes, thank you for setting it up. That was
Sure, and this is intro planned.
that was perfect. So a lot of times we're asked, so what is the population of younger girls that you work with? And by younger, I mean 18, 19, 20. It doesn't have to just be 12, 13 years old. Are they runaways? Were they in foster care? Yes, and yes. A lot of times, yes. Many times broken homes, yes. But we also have girls and women who are from two-parent homes. We have a situation where it's almost unbelievable. And I think sometimes people don't believe me when I tell this, but hand to God, it's true. We really had this situation happen where we had a woman who connected with us, and she had said her daughter was being trafficked, and she wanted to kind of connect with us and get educated on what we were doing, and she kind of wanted to become an advocate herself. And so through that process, she shared her story, and her daughter was 16 years old in high school, and she was being trafficked while she lived at home, while she was going to school. Mom was a school nurse, and Dad was an FBI agent. And Dad was the kind of FBI agent where he was counterterrorism, so he was gone quite a bit overseas. And Dad admittedly did not know what the red flags were. And she was their youngest child. They had had 3 older. She had had some self-esteem issues, which is another vulnerability. She was a little bit heavier. Her sister was this beauty queen who did everything right, and her brothers were these star athletes, and then there was her. And she had a vulnerability of, I'm not as good as my siblings, I don't fit in really with the rest
I'm
of
not
them.
as pretty as my sister, so on and so forth.
And traffickers who are worth their salt will recognize that, and they will prey upon it. And that's what happened in that situation. And so it isn't just fill in the blank of what you think a victim is going to come from or look like. There are those situations.
And so don't just leave us hanging there with that cliffhanger. Is she safe now? Is she okay?
So the story goes on. I didn't know how much time. I just talk and talk and talk. So if you give me an opening,
well, we only have a few minutes left.
I'll take a few more hours. So what happened was they tried to get her help, and she had basically Stockholm Syndrome with her trafficker. And so Stockholm Syndrome is when you have a trauma bond with someone, and she had that. And so when he went to trial, Mom and Dad sat on the side of prosecution, and she sat on the side of defense. She sat on his side. She waited for him while he was in jail. And when he got out, she lived with him for a period of time. And then she bounced around and had other traffickers. And thankfully now, it's been a number of years. This happened when she was 16. Now she's right around 23. She's doing much better, and she's on a different path. But it's not an instantaneous. It's an onion of a problem, and there's so many layers. You peel back one layer, and you have 14 more to deal with.
Yeah. Wow. Well, at least it has somewhat of a happy ending, you know, and she's on the right path now. You know, in this business of social media, we only have a couple minutes left, but I can't stress enough the importance that parents know, even if they're not being trafficked, you know, parents should just know what their kids are doing on the internet. You know, I personally know of some people who they've got good kids, they trust them, they don't have the slightest or the first clue what their kids are doing on the internet. And they don't want to know. It's like out of sight, out of mind. I've shared with them booklets that I've gotten from law enforcement, from technology people. Hey, this is how to keep your kids safe on the internet. They don't even want them. You know, they just out of sight, out of mind, like I said, and it's ridiculous. And they're setting their kids up for something to potentially happen. Will it always happen? No, but they're setting their kids up for that potential.
Because that's what predators look for.
Yeah, yeah. You were going to say something.
I was going to say the biggest thing I always tell parents is I don't care if they're 15, 16, or 17. Ask for their passwords on their iPhones. Ask for their email passwords, and you better be checking it. And yes, you can delete stuff. I mean, children are clever.
Yeah.
Let's face
Yes,
it.
they
They're
are.
they're very clever little human beings. But I think it's important and also to have that dialogue because no teenager is going to be perfect, and I think you have to set that platform that if they do something wrong, or they see something going on with one of their friends, that they can come to you. There may be consequences, you know, as there should be, but there should be that avenue for them to come in. But I am amazed at how many parents don't know the passwords to anything online, any of their social media or their phone. And the other thing too is encouraging the parents to make sure that their kids, especially if they are on Facebook, because like Lisa said, there's predators out there looking for anything because their profiles are public versus private where only their friends can see. So I mean, that's critical too.
And the predators, let's make this point real quickly, the predators are oftentimes disguising themselves
As a fellow 15-year-old.
Yes, exactly. And of the same sex, usually, you know. So I'm a buddy. You can rely on me. You can confide in me. And before you know it, they're roped in. So, and I wish we had another hour to talk about this, but we don't.
Yeah.
So I have time simply to say thanks to you guys for being here.
Thank you for having
you know,
us.
and thank you for all the work you're doing and continue to do. And I'd like to have you guys back at some point in the future
absolutely.
to share some more about your work and the good stories that hopefully are coming out of it.
Yeah, because you should see the other rock stars that are.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Got a bigger table?
This is as big as it gets, but we can squeeze a couple more people in. So anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to you at home for watching. Thanks to the crew, and we will see you next time. Until then, take care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.